Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts, and I guess book lovers too, readers. Okay, so this is episode one of the new series I'm doing. I don't really have a better title other than Giallo Reads, where I will be reading Giallo books, Giallo adjacent books, all that such, and giving you my analysis, my reviews. I'm going to be honest, it's going to be less analyses. I'm just not that super bright of a person, but I will be running you through the plots of what I'm reading and giving you my thoughts. This first series of episodes will be covering the original 1970 book Cruising, written, I almost said directed by, written by Gerald Walker, or is it Gerald Walker? Anyways, so I have read this book once earlier this year, and I read it so quickly, like at work during downtime. I think I read it in the span of a week, and I'd read it after already seeing the movie. And so I had a lot of comparisons I could do. I could draw from the book to the movie. A lot of differences, a lot of differences. And essentially they're really only similar in the initial plot, like the plot synopsis of the book and the movie, you could say are similar, but how they play out is incredibly different. So, I mean, yeah, I'll give you a quick rundown without giving too many spoilers away just yet. In the movie, if you are familiar, we are following. Now I'm forgetting all the names. There's so many names, but we're following Al Pacino's character who gets hired to go undercover, uh, pretend to be gay in hopes of trying to catfish the. Is that what you call it? He's in terms of trying to trap the killer, and the book is that too, but the movie decides, why don't we focus on like the underground gay leather and S&M bars of New York, and we go in there and not try to exploit it. I mean, that wasn't the director's intention, although some people would disagree that it's it comes off that way. And especially for the director to not be a gay man is like, well, you are exploiting our culture, you are exploiting what we do. I've heard that firsthand from many people. But regardless of that, it does differ from the book, where that whole setting not found in the book at all. And what the book does interestingly, which is different from the movie. In the movie, also the main character Al Pacino, um, he does have a girlfriend that he kind of has to like keep in the dark as he's doing this secret assignment. And in the book, the cop John Lynch is doesn't have a relationship, and he comes off kind of as if he's asexual. Like he yeah, I don't know. I'll get into it more, but the the implications of him pretending to be gay and meeting the neighbor who becomes his friend. In the book, there's way stronger implications that maybe he actually is gay. Maybe this was a side of himself that he just never allowed to ever see the light of day because of his history. And you get way more of that in the book in terms of what happened with him when he was in the Army Reserve, I believe it is, and his relationship with his uncle, and just what masculinity was to him. There's way more character stuff in the book, and in the movie, it's practically non-existent. The other thing that the book does is it switches between three perspectives, three point of views. It switches between the killer, who is right out in the open. It's like you are with the killer, you know it's the killer, and you're following them. You're in their mind. And that is Stuart Richards. And then you jump to John Lynch, who is the cop going undercover. And then you jump to Captain Edelson. You jump to his notebooks. So all of the chapters with him are what he's writing in his diary or his work notebook. And yeah, the book is way richer. Obviously, books are usually deeper than the movies, but that's just how those mediums work. Book and film are different mediums, and they require a different type of execution that will work within the format that they are. So Obviously, the changes that were made in the book to the film are good. They're warranted for doing a film. It is just he did very much change what happens. And people say, a lot of people were protesting the movie getting made. Obviously, they didn't have the script. They didn't know what happens in the movie. But if they had read the book and they knew what happens in the book and they've read it, it's kind of understandable. The book is very, at least I shouldn't say the book, but the characters. Characters are very racist, very homophobic. Um, you're getting, the FA word thrown around a lot. You're getting the N word thrown around a fair amount. You're getting a lot of different slurs thrown around a lot. And the killer very much is acting in that stereotypical archetype of a closeted gay person who is killing the homosexuality he's killing the homosexuality within him in an external way by killing other gay men. And you kind of have that hinted at in the movie, but not really. And if you really tried to go that direction in the movie, it kind of contradicts itself, because you do see, I don't remember if the character in the movie is also called Stuart Richards. I think it is Yes, it is. Yeah. He's frequenting the underground bars, and again, because of the nature of the movie is intentionally ambiguous, even though the actor playing Stuart Richards is playing the killer in one of the kills. I mentioned this, that the three kills that you really see are always being played by a different actor, and the victim is always um an actor who had just played the killer in the previous murder scene. And so when you get to like the last one, it is played by the actor who is also playing Stuart Richards. There's a lot of things you could derive from that. Anyway, the movie is doing something completely different from the book, and I applaud it, but I'm not talking about the movie here. I am talking about the book. So, for the format of this particular series covering cruising, knowing the structure of cruising, every 3 chapters, or every chapter, it switches perspective. So every 3 chapters, it resets. So you're following John Lynch, Captain Edelson, Stuart Richards. John Lynch, Captain Edelson, Stuart Richards. John Lynch, Captain Edelson, Stuart Richards. Gosh, tongue twister. And so I decided I'm going to go through every single coupling of that, and then redo and then whoops, and then go to the next series of chapters. So for this first episode, though, I'm going to do one extra, because the first chapter is the prologue, and it's also called chapter 0. So I'm going to be doing prologue, John Lynch, Captain Edelson, Stuart Richards, and then next it'll be John Lynch, Captain Edelson, Stuart Richards, so on until we get to the end. So I am in the course of rereading this book. I'm taking notes. I'm trying to cover the chapters after I read them so it can still be fresh. Even though I have the notes, I can still kind of take from what I've just read. And unfortunately, I did start rereading the book a week or two ago, and I didn't have the time or the focus, maybe I should admit, to start this series. So before I sat down to record, I did reread the prologue, because the prologue is only like 8 or 9 pages. By the way, I'm reading it off of a Kindle on my phone, because you can't get the book in a physical copy. At least it's very hard to get, or it's very expensive, and I'm not going to spend however much it is to get this book that I can just get on a Kindle for $2 or however much it is. So reading it'll say, I don't know if you've ever read on a Kindle, but it'll tell you at the beginning of a chapter, like, oh, there's 18 pages or 18 minutes left in the chapter. And I must be reading slower than that, because if it says it's 18 minutes, it's taken me like 20 something minutes. Whatever. I thought I was a pretty good reader. I spent a whole few years during the quarantine reading like all day. That was all I did. But anyways, let's get to it. So here I've got some notes. like I said, I did reread the prologue because I was looking at the notes like, what? Okay, so the prologue of Cruising begins with you're following someone, you don't know who they are, and they are with someone, a young man, and they forget what the person's name is. They're like, his name is Eric or Alec, and he keeps referring to him in his mind as Eric Alec because he doesn't remember what the guy's name is. But the two guys are walking along together. It is early June, much like when I'm filming this. It is early June in New York. They pass by the Museum of Natural History and they kind of stop because a patrol car is cruising by. And interestingly, we get this line that the narrator, I'll just call him, which we find out it is Stuart Richards eventually. He says, "Here we all are." And that stood out to me as I was going through reading this because it's very close to the lullaby line of who's here, you're here, I'm here, here we all are. Pretty cool. So they're sitting there, the cops roll on by, they kind of he's smoking it. The narrator gets this idea to like, instead of looking suspicious, because the cops would go around gay bashing, and so it was like, let's just stop here, let's smoke a cigarette. So they're smoking a cigarette on, or he's smoking a cigarette on the bench. He puts some space between him and Eric Alec because he doesn't want it to look like they're just, gay guys going around hooking up. He's smoking a cigarette kind of in a way where he's covering his face. He does see the cops. The cops go by, and they clearly made a joke because they start laughing to themselves. And Eric Alec is like, well, they're laughing at us. And he's like, well, there's going to be plenty of that tonight. And then he kind of goes on this tangent in his mind about how there's all these gays are out. He's throwing the F word around, the FA word around. He's just like, yeah, they're all over, more like a museum of unnatural history. So it's very clear that this character is homophobic. Like, okay. So it's also a little suspicious because you're like, well, why is he going with this guy if he's also hating on all the gays in the area? There's also this relationship between the two of them, which it's very clear that one of them is the hustler and one of them is the buyer. And as it unfolds, you kind of figure out, okay, so Eric Alec is the buyer, and you also pick up that he's a married man and has kids, and so he's exploring the side of himself. Either it's something that he's finally started thinking about, like giving more attention to, or it's something he's probably struggled with all his life. You don't really ever get to learn that, but that is essentially what you do learn of him. And so they go to the Ramble, which is again where most of the park scenes in the film take place. You also get some information on the killer. I'll just again switch around how I'm calling him. He's smoking a cigarette and he keeps remarking how he's like, his lungs are getting tight. He's coughing a little bit more than what seems normal. He's has asthma. It's not so obvious, at least it wasn't for me when I first read it, that he had asthma, but as you get into later chapters, he says he has asthma. And so going back, rereading this part for the third time, I'm like, oh, okay. So it does let you know pretty early. So anyways, they go into the Ramble. Eric Alec knows of a place where they can go. He says, sorry, we couldn't come to my place. The air conditioning is broken. And then the other guy, Stuart Richards, calls out. He's like, aren't you like, you sure you're not married or whatever? And he's like, let's not talk about that. So they go off to this playground to fool around, and Stuart is making these comments, kind of weird jokes about how like the whole act of what they're doing, I don't want to say fornication, but just the act of messing around has these religious similarities. It's someone getting on their knees in front of the other person who's bestowing them whatever. And he's laughing, and then he catches an echo of his laughter in like a mimicking tone. And It's not super obvious if this is just an echo or if someone is in the vicinity and they're making fun of him. Kind of creepy, but so that's that. And that is kind of how the prologue ends. It gets cut off. Okay. On to chapter 1. Okay, so we are at chapter 1, the first John Lynch chapter. And this is very similar to the movie in terms of him coming in and getting the assignment from Captain Edelson. You get also the Edelson bit where he accidentally calls him the wrong name and gets corrected. And so we are in John Lynch's mind. He's pretty racist. I don't know why. This is essentially the same. And well, it's similar. It's one of the most similar scenes in the movie to how it is in the book, where John Lynch, the character in the movie, I always forget this. Steve Burns. I don't know why they had to change the name, but anyways, he gets called in, talks to Edelson, gets asked to do the job. But this is where we have some differences. So, let me get to put on my glasses so I can read these notes. We have the same bit where he comes in and immediately calls him Edelstein, and there's the whole it's Edelson bit. So this in the book leads to, because we're inside John Lynch's mind, this is where you get a lot of his like anti-Semitism and racism, general xenophobia and homophobia. Like this is kind of the where it starts in his perspective. Or once he goes on that, he's like, these Jews and their names, and it's kind of ridiculous. It's very ridiculous. But that's the character, so that's our hero. And in this chapter alone, there's like 6 instances of him making anti-Semitic remarks in his mind, of course. And then there's like 4 other racial slurs against other groups, be they Black or Irish or whatever. So some of the differences in the book in this scene, Edelson is described as being about 50, 55, but whereas in the movie, he's played by Paul Sorvino. Is that his name? Yes, Paul Sorvino, excuse me. In the book, he's described as being like old and shrimply, like very skinny. So that's a big difference in at least the character and the description. What do we learn from about John Lynch in this chapter? Well, we learned that he went to parochial school. Right out of parochial school, he joined the military and he joined the army. There's also some similarities drawn up to Captain Edelson and Father Feeney, I believe was his name, is the principal at the religious school that John went to, and how this guy could have kicked him out. He draws parallels to how if he doesn't do what Edelson wants, Edelson would probably have no problem kicking him out of the police academy. Well, not police academy, the police department. Excuse me. It is late. What else do we learn? He's got a deceased mother, and then we learned he's also got a deceased father, so he doesn't have any parents. His uncle Phil was also a cop, and Edelson might know John's uncle Phil. Okay. John can see that Edelson has a wedding ring, so either he's married or he's at least really pretending he is. Probably really married. Then we get then he's asked, what is your, when's the last time you like spoke with a homosexual? And John is like, year and a half. Not since I was in the army and there was a gay bar down the street. And he's like, Elson's like, oh, okay, I understand. You go in there, they buy you a drink, you probably buy them a drink, whatever. And he's like, in his mind, he's like, well, they would buy all the other army guys drinks, not me though. And then they mention the stabbing recently, and in the newspapers, it's called the playground stabbing. So, Eric Alec, I think we find out his name was Alec, was stabbed 74 times in the abdomen, chest, and throat. His butt was slashed, and his genitals were hacked off and tossed into the bushes. Wow. And this also marks the fourth kill to happen in the city in the span of several months. The second, so Edelson says that he's a liaison between the homicide group and the vice group, and they're coming together to work on this assignment because with this recent killing, someone I think in vice realized there was a similarity to an earlier killing, and they've decided this must be the same killer because the MO seems to be them targeting gay men. And we learn about the previous murders, which all occurred on a holiday. So it's mentioned that the second victim was a male hustler. The man that killed in the park recently was married with kids, so he's at least, they don't know for certain that he was gay, but they're assuming that he must have been if he was killed in this part of town where it's very common for gay men to be running about at night. And I believe that it is the third victim was killed in their apartment. The third person also had their penis cut off and stuffed down their throat. Two were killed outdoors. So the first three killings were all on holidays. And the reason why this task force is getting brought together, I mean, beyond the obvious that they think they do have a serial killer, is that the fact that this killing took place not on a holiday, just on a random Friday, for Edelson is worrying because he's like, I don't like when patterns change. And so this might mean that the killer is now going to be killing with way more frequency. If the pattern of time changes, the pattern of locations could change because they also have seemed to isolate the location of these killings. In the later chapters, they actually have details as far as like the streets, like between this area and this area and this area. So they actually have like a rough pinpoint on where the killing grounds, the killing fields are for this murderer. Let me just make sure I'm all caught up. Okay, yeah, and that killing took place on June 3rd. John Lynch is going to be one of 10 other undercover agents going in. And for him, this is good because this is huge because he will fast track his time at the police department from being just a regular uniformed officer to being a detective. He'll get a $2,000 raise immediately. Very big deal. Fast track his career here. And one of the last things that so I'm going to just look away from my notes and just kind of go off. So John has obviously a lot of questions about this. What am I supposed to do? Okay, so I'm supposed to blend in. I'm supposed to do this. Okay, well, what happens what if someone sees me? He's like, no one is going to see you. No one's going to recognize you. You'll be fine. Trust me. You don't have to worry about that. And he asks, okay, so what happens if I find someone, I don't know if they're the killer, and I'm supposed to go off with them somewhere? Like, what am I supposed to actually do it? And Edelson makes a point. He says, well, our killer has never made it with any of the victims. It's not like he hooked up with them and then killed them. He just killed them before anything happened once he got them alone. And so that's kind of his indication that, like, you shouldn't have to go all the way. If you get off into a bush with someone and you don't perceive them that they're actually, a threat, like they're actually going to try and kill you, just make up an excuse and leave. And then he tells him, you're not going to have a gun, but you will have this. And he pulls out what is described initially as like a pen flashlight. Like, it can't be any bigger than a fountain pen. It's about the width of a cigar humidor. I smoke cigars and I can't even say this word, but generally it's like it would be like I don't know if I have any still, but they're like it's a tube. It's like a yay big of a tube, maybe about that long. Oh my God, I can't get my fingers straight. That long. And so he's like, okay, great. I'm going to blind them with a flashlight. And he says, no, it's actually 5 ounces of mace. So uh, that's what you got. You're to mace them. And yeah, he takes the assignment. That's it. Next chapter is very short. It's chapter 2, and it is Edelson's notebook. Like I said, all of the chapters with Edelson are just him writing in his work notebook, his work diary, and he's talking about what he's going through with this whole thing. He's kind of venting, and the chapters are very short, very very short, and at a point they kind of are just I want to say a bit of the same, but a little bit. In this first instance, he complains about Lynch, talking about his attitude, talking about how like I deal with assholes like this on the force all the time. Um, he kind of starts talking about how difficult this process is has been, and he's wor- worried about what the success of this will be. He goes more on this later, but in this first instance, that's kind of all he really talks about. He does mention that he did know John's uncle Phil. That's kind of all we really get as of right now. The other thing that Edelson admits is that his wife did leave him, but he still wears the ring. And then there's this whole somewhat of a philosophical breakdown of how this is how it is for guys in the department is even if you're married, at a point you become married to the job. And he still wears the ring because it's symbolic of something. And maybe his marriage fell apart, but he's still married to the police force, and so he's going to keep wearing it. On to the next chapter. Okay, now this is the gosh, I got to catch myself here. This is the next chapter. This is the first official chapter that's labeled Stuart Richards. But if you go off of the prologue, this is our second time with Stuart Richards. So, what happens here? What we learn about Stuart in these pages is that he is medicated for his lungs, for asthma. So we kind of got the little bits of that in the prologue, but now we get confirmation of what it is. We learn that he goes to the cinema every day, and he spends like hours in the cinema. And it's not just like he goes to see one movie. He might go in there and see a number of movies, and usually he's rewatching the same movies. And I think it's the next chapter where he goes and he sees the third man, but he goes off about the movies he sees, the movies he really enjoys, the ones that are playing that are maybe a little better than the rest, and all that. So that's what he does by day, and then he fucks every night. He's got a little harem, rotating harem of different women that he kind of just will call up. And again, this is something that's very interesting and different from the movie. Very different from Stuart Richards in the movie. In the movie, he's pretty much a gay guy. Not saying like, oh, he's just a gay guy, but you don't get a whole lot about him. He goes to Columbia University. He goes out to the gay clubs, and then you get some stuff that he probably had some issues with his father. They don't go into a whole lot of details about it in the movie, but it's very left open to interpretation. But he is a student. He is way more on the side of being openly gay, and his motive for killing, if he really is the killer throughout the entire murder sprees, is more ambiguous. Not in the book. In the book, he is very much this, oh my God. his personality reminds me of a mixture of a little bit of Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, and then a little bit of, I have to pull this up because I cannot remember what the character's name is. But this was a book I read a couple years ago. Shit, what is the character's name? Ignatius J. Riley, from the book A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Uh, yes. Upon rereading this book, I am like, dude, this guy is Riley. He is just, he's kind of a loser, but he will not turn that mirror inwards. He will not reflect on himself and how he is just wasting his time and how he is this like bullshit philosopher. He thinks he's so nuanced and so bright, and it's the world around him that is failing. His father is failing, and oh, his father just doesn't get it. He's just this, company man. It's just, I mean, it's been a very long time since I've read Catcher in the Rye, but I remember that's why I didn't really enjoy that book when I read. I mean, I read that as a kid, or I read that in school. I was I in high school? I think I might have been. I must have been in high school. It must have been like sophomore, junior year. Couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand Holden Caulfield. If I was to reread it now, I might see what the author was going for. But at the time, I was just like, this character annoys the piss out of me. And Stuart Richards is kind of like that. He does go to Columbia. He's a student. He struggles when there's no work, though. Like when there's not really, when he has these big assignments he has to do, he will he admits it. I think he admits it in a later chapter, but he does admit that he essentially procrastinates, and he does what he be doing, going to the cinema, calling up his girlfriends. But when he actually doesn't have something that he should be doing like that, like there's no assignment looming, he's way more lost and aimless, and he is very much just doing this shit, which is, I mean, it's fine. It sounds like something that a lot of sounds like literally something that all guys do in their 20s, is just like, well, not all guys, at least my friends, we all just watched movies, were philosophers in cinema, and had sex. So let's go on. He complains about his father. His father is a successful CPA, and how he is just a failure and a disappointment to his father. Interestingly, though, John Lynch mentions in the previous chapter when he's being interviewed that he was taking on an apprenticeship with a CPA, and he didn't take to it. He that's why he ended up joining I think why he ended up joining the army is because his dad wanted him to be successful, or his dad wanted him to do that. I think so. I might be wrong there. I'm not sure when his dad died, but the point was he was trying to be on the good path, and essentially it wasn't for him, and he decided, well, fuck that, I'll do this instead. So back to Stuart Richards. He carries a knife. He then talks about Eric Alec and how he killed him, and so that's our definitive confirmation that this is the same guy from the prologue. Very homophobic. I mentioned the procrastinating. He's a hypocrite, which, if that wasn't obvious, there, he's pretty much a big hypocrite. Parents separated early. His father remarried. Okay, and then we get to Alfred. So the way Stuart talks about Alfred is this, it comes off as someone talking about their crush, like, Alfred, oh, Alfred, oh, sweet innocent Alfred with your stoic face. And I don't know, I don't remember the quotes exactly, but he's talking like he's pining for this guy. And Alfred is either his neighbor or his roommate. He lives in this, I think he lives in like student apartments, and he mentions that he's very remorseful, sort of. He looks back on something that happened between the two of them with regret, and it's essentially like his girlfriend Terry had broken things off with him, and so he was like was kicked out of there. He was single, and he wasn't finding solace in the movies and just random hookups. And earlier he mentions about him basically like oblivion chasing, like he's searching for something to just. And what he says about Alfred, again, it's not entirely clear if he hooked up with Alfred, if it went that far, or if he got, he got a little drunk and was just sharing more information, more vulnerable side of himself. But he does use the word, he was vulnerable and he was like susceptible. And whatever happened, he seems to have confided with Alfred, or and then he also mentions that he was able to talk to him about like deeper things, and he applauds him. He makes a homophobic remark here where he was just like, salutes him essentially for being like, wow, like that's pretty, that's a big deal for a gay person to be able to like have a conversation about like Russian literature or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, because obviously if you're gay, then you only want to talk about penis. I don't know. It was a very just homophobic thing. Like, oh wow, who would have thought? But he has this encounter with Alfred in December, and then he talks about going out that night and killing the hustler. And the hustler was the second person killed, because the first person killed was on Thanksgiving. And also the second person killed was the hustler. So it really, the book is pretty good about dropping these little hints like, okay, so he probably is bisexual. He clearly he's not full on homosexual, because he has girlfriends, he has a lot of sex. And in one of the later chapters, I haven't gotten to it yet in the rereading, but he talks about like 3 different girls that he's consistently hooking up with. But clearly it also seems that there's more to him than that. He must be bisexual. Whatever, he never wants to talk about it. And this instance, this event that happened with Alfred very much seems like it was the first time he was admitting it to someone, probably, or he maybe spilled the beans too much. Maybe he said some things to Alfred in confidence that he never would allow himself to do. He doesn't. I don't think he mentions with if alcohol was involved. I think he literally was just emotionally vulnerable and felt comfortable saying the stuff. But when I don't want to say came to his senses, but when that other side of him came back to basically kind of get control, it resulted in him immediately going out with a knife, killing a gay man. And he clearly has done this before. He did it a month before. So why did he do it initially? Book is good about not giving you too many answers right away, but filling you in on some answers. It's like when you're taking a test and you're like, oh wait, I can go back and answer this one. Like, okay, I still need to go back and answer these ones before it and whatever, but I can go back and answer that question. And then the last little bit in this chapter is he's been sunbathing shirtless, which to me just calls out to the movie, the scene where Stuart Richards goes out and is sunbathing shirtless in the park, and Steve Burns is spying on him, also sunbathing. That's kind of where we're at with the first 3-4 chapters, including the prologue. It is a very fascinating read. Clearly the book is not for everyone, but I mean, most books are probably not for everyone. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff in there. It's not the first time I've read books with slurs being thrown around a lot. Like a lot of Stephen King's early stuff is you're dealing with racist characters or anti-Semitic characters or homophobic characters, and especially in these decades, like the 70s and the 80s, it's way more common. And so it's common for characters to just be kind of assholes, a little grittier. Again, with the times, it's not like if this character is today, where it's like, wow, man, it's like that the sensibilities were different back then, and I'm not trying to justify it. It's just different times. And I mean, you got to remember this is also 50 years ago. So, anyways, so that will do it for the first rundown of this Giallo reads for the 1970 novel or novella Cruising by Gerald Walker. Um, Come back. We'll talk about chapters 4, 5, and 6. And this has been Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo. Nothing else. I'll see you next time.